Hazak ubaruch. Good morning, Mo'ev Rabotai. Be'ezrat Hashem, Mincha is going to be at 5:25. Please be on time. The Yalkut Yosef discusses a case which is a very hot topic that has been discussed probably for the last 80 years, 100 years, really going back maybe 250 years ago. The Shulchan Aruch writes, based on the Gemara, that one is permitted to kill lice on Shabbat. And the reason the Gemara says is because all of the melachot are learned out from the Mishkan. And in the Mishkan, the types of animals that were killed were animals that were, the language is pareh veraveh, which means they multiply through mating of a female and a male. And since kinim, lice, do not multiply through a male and a female, rather it implies, like today what they call, the scientists call it spontaneous generation. The implication is that it implies spontaneously. And therefore, it's permitted to kill because it's not similar to what they prohibited, what the Torah prohibited in the Mishkan. And there's no rabbinic prohibition, there's no Torah prohibition in killing lice because it's not in the category of types of things that are prohibited. Now, this began a big controversy because about 250 years ago, they did all these trials in different ways of research, and they discovered that lice do pareh veraveh. They do have a male and there's a female, and they mate, and they produce an egg, and that egg is born and hatches and everything else. So it's clearly pareh veraveh. And therefore the question became, do we say that if the Gemara tells us that something is mutar to do, so in this case, to kill lice, it says it's permitted, and it gave a reason why it's permitted, and now the reason seemingly doesn't apply. Are we still able to follow this halacha? And if so, then why? So in terms of the question number one, it does seem from Chacham Ovadia that we don't really get involved with science. At the end of the day, if the Torah says it's permitted, it's permitted. The Gemara is the Torah, it's Torah Shebe'al Peh, and there's no questioning the Gemara, and therefore that's the end of the discussion. Even though it comes out that you're being lenient, but that's the halacha, that's the halacha. Halacha doesn't change. There were those that took a different approach and said, at the end of the day, science says differently. Maybe there's some explanation, maybe there's some reason, and it's better to be machmir. We're not saying against the Torah, we're just saying be strict. And there's essentially a third opinion that says, well, let's try to explain this. Maybe it's possible that the lice that they had in the Gemara's times is different than the lice we have today. And if that's the case, so maybe what we have today, we're not allowed to kill, but what the Gemara had, they are allowed to kill. Now, all of these are essentially conjectures. Halacha le'maaseh, that's not accurate, because the lice that is identified in the times of Shulchan Aruch is the same lice that was identified in the Rishonim, that was the same in the Gemara. As the Gemara uses the terminology of kinim, the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Hananel explains lindres. Now, I don't know how many of you know Spanish well, or all those languages of the Latin languages, but lindres translates exactly into the lice that we have today. Even to this very day in Spanish, they still call it that. And that was identified by Rabbeinu Hananel 1,000 years ago. And also in the Gemara itself, you look up the Gemara in Nazir, it makes a very clear indication that it knew exactly what the lice is. It knew exactly how to get rid of it. It knew that there were eggs of lice and that they stay latched onto the hair. It knew the whole thing. So now it really makes us wonder. So if the Gemara understood the lice and knew the real ramifications behind lice, so why did the Gemara permit it and say that it doesn't mate and say it spontaneously generates when we see that the lice does have eggs and it's pareh veraveh like usual? So the commentaries today say that the person has to understand, if it seems to be that science contradicts the Torah, it's not really a contradiction. It's because you don't understand what the Torah is saying, and you think the science contradicts the Torah. And in this case is a beautiful example of such a thing, because the Gemara never said that it's spontaneously generated. The Gemara says it's not pareh veraveh. Now, what does it mean that it's not pareh veraveh? It means that even though there's a male and a female, the male and the female produce an egg. The egg cannot actually grow and develop embryo in it unless it is on the hair. And that's very specific because there's a humidity to the hair. So in essence, what the father and the mother does, the male and the female, is they plant seeds on the head of the person. And those seeds, almost like a tree, they just grow and develop because of the humidity of the sweat of a person. It's able to develop like a seed that you plant in the ground. And the Gemara says that's not called pareh veraveh. Pareh veraveh does not need anything external. It doesn't need a planting on the head in order for it to grow. And that's a fact that lice cannot produce children, offspring, unless they're on the head of the person. That's why we don't find lice just randomly. You find it on the head. They can't survive. Other than that, even the adults and certainly the babies, the embryos don't develop. And that's what the Gemara meant when it's not pareh v'raveh. It comes out that the lice of today is the lice the Gemara was referring to. It has all the identifications of the Gemara's lice. And the Gemara was saying a very sophisticated argument of why it's different than all other animals. And it comes out, halakha lema'aseh, like Rav Ovadia said, that you would be permitted to kill lice today, and it is not in conflict with science. It's just understanding halakha properly. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.